James Jackson is a journalist and also a political analyst. He is joining us live from Berlin. Hello, James, and thank you very much for joining us on WION World as One. I'll begin by asking you, what do you make of the timing of Germany's statement, especially coming in the midst of a counteroffensive which Russia has claimed to have failed?
So you have to remember, this isn't an official statement by the German government. This is a leaked document by the Bundeswehr, the German military, which was leaked to the Bild Zeitung, which is a popular newspaper here. It's meant to be a sober assessment of reality, but because it's true that the Ukrainian counteroffensive isn't going as quickly as some people had hoped. But I was working on this story yesterday for The Telegraph, and it has actually been received quite controversially, not just by Ukrainians, but also by British defence officials who my colleagues spoke to. And they found that they thought that the tone of the report was quite patronising, as did Sergei Sumleny here in Berlin, a think tanker from the European Resilience Initiative Centre. And effectively, this morning, there has been a reaction already, where you could say it's a reaction to this, which is that €250 million has been announced for mine defence, clearing mines. So it's true that the Ukrainians are struggling to get it so low, but there is a question of how fair this report is, because a lot of it is effectively the German military, which is not the most experienced and, to be honest, not the most highly respected either, after massive budget cuts in the last 30 years and not much combat experience, saying, why are the Ukrainians promoting people with combat experience over people who've been trained by NATO in Germany? So the question is, is it the Bundeswehr's place to say that? Is it just them valuing their own tactics and not being open to others? I think it's fair to ask.
James, now that you've had access to this document, what else does it say about the war in Ukraine vis-a-vis what they've just said about their troops and the training of troops in Ukraine?
So effectively, the criticism by the Bundeswehr is that the Ukraine is spreading its forces too thinly across the nearly 1,000-kilometer front line. I think that's understandable. The main tension here is that Western tactics work best when with groups together, large groups of soldiers together, but supported by air force and then artillery, which Ukraine doesn't really have. They're running out of shells, which is why they've had to now use cluster munitions, also quite controversial, and they have very little, practically no air force to support these troops. So what the Ukrainians are doing is they've spread their forces wide to try and find a hole in the Russian defense, but the Russians have dug in very successfully, much more so than many observers had expected. So Ukraine's sort of probing different holes, potential holes in the chinks in the Russian armor, right. But they haven't been successful at finding that yet. And Ukraine, because they've lost so many casualties already, they're quite hesitant to send large groups together, and also hesitant to lose large amounts of Western weaponry, which of course then they would have be criticised for by the Bundeswehr and others as well, if they lost all of the 50 Leopard tanks, for example, by sending them into one area that didn't happen to be the right crack in the defences. So it's a bit of a devil you do, devil you don't situation. That being said, this is a very unique situation. We haven't seen warfare like this in about 100 years in Europe. And I think it's easy for armchair generals to say, and actual generals who are very far removed from the front lines to say, oh, they should be doing this, they should be doing that. But what the Ukrainians say back is that, let us fight. We don't want to lose our men. We don't want to lose our people and our equipment. And so they're trying to do as best as they can in a difficult situation when, of course, the Russian lines are heavily mined, with Ukraine now being the most mined country in the world. So,
all right, James, finally, let's just talk about this continuing war and this Western support of tanks and artillery to Ukraine. Is it really working for Ukraine? And also there is the support from the United States in terms of cluster munitions. Will this aid Ukraine in the long run? And there are also other critics who say that arming either Ukraine or Russia is only funding the war. What say you? And I want your brief response to that.
Sure. Very briefly, if you stop, if Russia stopped spending money on military, that war would end. If Ukraine stopped getting funding for their military, Ukraine would end. So this is an existential fight for Ukraine. I don't see that there's any other option for Ukrainian nationhood, but also for Western and European security, than to keep funding Ukraine. And not just throw lots of money. We have to give them the right things that they need. And what they say they need right now is air support and more artillery. And frankly, it's been disappointing to see Europe unable to create and get it on a war footing economically to manufacture enough shells to support Ukraine, because they are really outgunned on the eastern lines. Russia has taken this very seriously, has put a lot of its economy into creating weapons. And I think the West, if they truly want to support Ukraine and they want Ukraine to win, they need to do the same. But many Western leaders are still unclear whether they want Ukrainian victory or they just want Russia to be stopped. And those are two very different end results.
All right, I've been talking to James Jackson, who's a journalist and also political analyst. James, thank you very much for your inputs and for talking to WION World is One today.
Thanks for having me.